Right. Well, as Matthew said, my name is Walt. Koenig is how I
Oh, I'm sorry.
actually tend to pronounce it. Though, as I like to say, if you're going to pronounce it correctly, it's of course Koenig. But if you're going to mispronounce it, which I do anyway, I prefer Koenig. Um, but I was a research zoologist here at Hastings Reservation, which is a field station run by the University of UC Berkeley. Go Bears. Uh, and I was lucky enough to come down here as a grad student uh, when I was desperate for a research project and managed to decide that acorn woodpeckers would be a likely prospect. I didn't actually even start the study. The study was started by another guy, Michael McRoberts, and his wife Barbara back in 1972. But I came down here in the summer of 1974. Really loved the place. This is located, in case you don't know, in the beautiful sun-drenched Upper Carmel Valley, uh, inland from Monterey and inland from Carmel. We're about 26 miles in from the coast. It's of course not sun-drenched at the moment because the sun is currently setting out there. But it's a beautiful place. I quickly decided that I never wanted to leave. And amazingly enough, I have come pretty close to achieving that goal. I did more or less leave for several years there because we had the dual career couple problem, and my wife got a job at Cornell University. So I more or less moved to Ithaca, New York for a few years, but would come back here and continue to do the research on the birds for even though during that entire time. And then in 2016, actually, our house burned down in 2015, as houses are wont to do around here. And so we retired in 2016 and came back to Upper Carmel Valley. And now we have a beautiful house a few miles away from the reserve. And I come in here pretty much every day anyway to ride my bike and pretend like I'm still working. Anyway, uh, as Matthew mentioned, the Acorn Woodpecker Project has been going on for a long time. It is one of the most extensive long-term studies of any bird, really, that's out there. I started in 1974 and really kept going till pretty much I retired. And at this point, I don't really do much with the woodpeckers because it requires climbing trees, and my wife didn't like the idea of me falling out of a tree and having something turning into some kind of vegetable. I don't know. She likes vegetables, so I never really understood that problem. But on the other hand, I've been very lucky never to fall seriously out of a tree during all those years. So nowadays, I spend my most of the time I'm doing research. I also got interested in acorn production because, as I will mention, acorn woodpeckers surprisingly are highly dependent on acorns. Anyway, all right. So I'm going to mostly pretty much just tell you the basics of acorn woodpecker biology. They do have an incredibly complicated social system, so it takes a while to even get that kind of across. For those of you who heard Sahas several years ago, he undoubtedly went through this as well, but he then was interested in trying to follow birds around. We had little solar powered radio tags on them for several years, which he was in charge of. And so he would have talked more about that. I'm going to make sure you understand the basics of acorn woodpecker social behavior by the time we get out of here. So um, we are screen sharing, so presumably you are currently looking at a picture of a bunch of acorn woodpeckers. Is that true?
Yeah, we're seeing multiple images. This is your
Okay,
time.
all right. So up here in the upper left is a nice male. Uh, the red on the crown comes all the way up to the white on the forehead. Down below him is a nice adult female with the black on the crown, in between the red on the black on the forehead, in between the red on the crown and the white on the forehead. And then in the middle here at the bottom is a baby. Baby acorn woodpeckers have dark eyes. kind of small bills. They look kind of smallish, really. We have a bunch around our house at the moment. But the weird thing about them is that they all look like adult males in terms of their crown plumage. So the red on the crown comes all the way up to the white on the forehead. That goes for both males and females until the post-juvenile molt, which happens several months later. And here again is a male and a female in the lower right. All right, let's see if we can move on here. What do we have? Okay, Hastings. So I mentioned here we are in the beautiful Upper Carmel Valley. Hastings is part of what's known as the Natural Reserve System. The University of California, uh, it's a big state, as I'm sure all of you are aware. And it does not have, the university does not have a single big research station like University of Michigan. It's a good example. University of Montana has Flathead Lake, things like that. Instead, they have a series of, I think it's up to like 45 uh, natural reserve sites spread throughout the state. Usually, these are run by the campus that they're nearest to. However, Hastings was the one of the first of these, if not the first. It was donated to the university back in 1937. And back then, of course, there were only two campuses of the University of California, and Berkeley was the one that was closest. So Berkeley got it, and it has been run by UC Berkeley ever since. Oh, there we go. I put that down there, managed by the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology at UC Berkeley. Okay, so here we are. Here's Monterey Bay. Uh, Actually, way off here. I think those actually are the Sierras off in the distance. In any case, here's the Monterey Peninsula. Here's Carmel Bay, and here's Carmel Valley. So what we're going to do is we're going to go way up Carmel Valley, 26 miles, and here it is, the beautiful Hastings Reserve. Actually, this is the ranch next door to Hastings, but it gives you a good idea of what the oak savanna looks like here with the habitat with chaparral on these north-facing hillsides, and then mixed forest, mixed deciduous forest kind of uh, in here, but the main um, habitat of interest is this oak savanna. So, doesn't take long if you're in the oak savanna of California before you run into our favorite bird, the star of the show, the acorn woodpecker, here shown on one of his granaries. This is actually, again, not at Hastings. It's at a park nearby, Toro Park up near Salinas, which has some fabulous sycamore granaries, such as that one. And then I have a little video of storing. Each ham's a nut. His head whacks into the nuts with so much force it would knock a human unconscious. That's untrue, by the way. He just made that up. As the nuts dry, they shrink and have to be moved to smaller. That is true. They spent a lot of time in the winter just moving them around. This job's perfect for a bird with obsessive compulsive tendencies. Okay, there's a nice granary for you. All right, so I have to tell you one very important thing. Well, there are kind of two aspects to this. There's the positive and the negative. The positive is that acorn woodpeckers really do eat acorns. Okay, if you open up an acorn, any random acorn, and of course they're out there right now as we speak, because this is prime acorn time. Or if you pull an acorn out of a granary of an acorn woodpecker, which I've done a lot of, you will not unusually find that it is parasitized by one of these grubs. Usually these are weevils, which the adults lay their eggs in these things and then they eat the insides. And after a while, there isn't much left besides the frass of the weevil until it pupates and climbs out, exits the acorn. Here's an exit hole, and then falls down into the ground where they undergo the rest of their life cycle. Okay, this has led to what we like to call, we acorn woodpecker biologists is fondly known as the grub theory, which is that acorn woodpeckers are storing the acorns not for the acorns, but for the grubs that live inside them. But I am here to assure you all that even though an acorn woodpecker will be happy to eat a grub, any sort of insect larvae it happens to come across, that they are storing acorns for the acorns themselves, not for whatever happens to be growing inside them. And that's something you can confirm yourself just by watching an acorn woodpecker someday pull an acorn out of its granary. What it'll do, it'll take it to what we call an anvil, some place in one of its trees where there's a fissure so that it'll hold the acorn and it'll peck into it and you can actually watch it eating bits of the acorn. So they are literally eating acorns. They are not storing acorns for whatever happens to live inside them. Okay, that's the most important thing that I want you all to remember. So next time you hear someone say that acorn, it's amazing they store these acorns and they're eating the grubs that live inside them. You can assure them that they're storing the acorns to eat the acorns. However, what's also true is that even though the acorns are very important to the ecology of acorn woodpeckers, and I'll show you that in a minute, uh, acorns in fact make up a modest fraction of their diet. Also, if you watch acorn woodpeckers, you'll note that they spend most of their time, especially in these nice, beautiful days that we usually have. Well, we like to call them one goddamn perfect day after another around here. They're out there fly catching. They're out there, eating insects. They're mostly insectivorous. My best guess is that acorns overall make up maybe a third to a quarter of their diet. And that includes the winter when, they are important because when the weather's bad and there aren't any insects out there, uh, that's acorns are what really can keep them going. All right. A little bit about the range of acorn woodpeckers. We, of course, are here on the West Coast. They are limited to oak woodlands and oak savanna. They're down here in the highlands of Baja. Their stronghold is really Southwest and Mexico and Central America, which are really it's also the stronghold of oaks. There's something like close to 200 species of oaks in Mexico and Central America. And they go all the way into Colombia, where there are a few disjunct populations because there is a population of oaks down there, the Colombian oak. But we're going to talk mainly about here on the West Coast. They are go all the way up into Oregon. In fact, there are a few groups that have crossed the Columbia River, and so they are in Washington, at least to some extent, and have been doing pretty well. Maybe with luck, they're moving north, and who knows, they may even make it into Canada one of these days. Okay, there are a couple interesting things that I want to mention about acorn woodpecker distribution. First of all, their density increases with increasing oak diversity, the number of oak species that are out there, the density of oaks that happen to be in an area. That's not terribly surprising because the more oaks there are, the more acorns there are, the more food there is, the better the habitat is for acorn woodpeckers. Okay, what's really interesting about this graph, however, this comes from Christmas bird count data for those of you, and I trust it's most of you who have at one time or another participated in Christmas bird counts, is that, oops, that's not where I wanted to go. Here, I wanted to go here, is that the real distributional limit of acorn woodpeckers is not really set by the distribution of oaks. It's set by areas with at least two species of oaks. Now, there are exceptions, and I have to mention that because the Monterey Peninsula is one of them. But as I often like to say, this is why there are no acorn woodpeckers on the Berkeley campus, for those of you who went to Berkeley. And there are also no acorn woodpeckers in Oakland because there's, of course, only one native oak in those right when you get right at the coast live oak. And it's not until you get inland a little ways that you start getting blue oaks and valley oaks and a greater diversity of oaks. So that's when you start getting acorn woodpeckers really in any numbers. And then as the more oak species you get, uh, the more acorn woodpeckers show up. Now, why is this? This has to do with my other project, which is acorn production by California oaks. Oaks, as you probably know, if you've paid any attention to the acorn production in the oaks outside your door, uh, do not produce the same number of acorns every year. Acorn production varies greatly from one year to the next. They are what are known as masting species. Some years the entire population produces lots of acorns. Other years they may produce practically none at all. So when there's only one species of oak, the birds are stuck in an area where they're likely to experience an acorn crop failure literally every 3, 4 years or so. And apparently, the populations of woodpeckers just can't make it under those circumstances. Whereas as soon as you get a couple of species of oaks, the oaks don't necessarily mast synchronously. And so the probability of both of them failing to produce acorns at the same time in the same year decreases significantly. And so the probability of having a year when there aren't any acorns is rare enough that the woodpeckers are able to do pretty well. All right. There's a lot of other things that the acorn crop affects in terms of acorn woodpeckers. For one thing, in a really good acorn year, acorn woodpeckers can even breed in the fall. Now, and it's possible that's happening around, I mean, I don't know. It's not that good a year compared to last year. Last year was a very good year for coast live oaks and blue oaks, both of which are quite common up there in the Santa Clara Valley. But those and valley oaks all did pretty well this year as well. So it's possible that there are actually baby woodpeckers around you as we speak. The latest I ever banded a baby acorn woodpecker here was November 1st. So you can actually get babies, fledging in October and even early November. But otherwise, the breeding season of acorn woodpeckers, in essence, it starts in the fall, but then there's a break for about, is it 6 months? It's a long time. Nobody starts a nest in October, November, December, January, February, but then March, in a good year, you can get those nests again. And the number of number of offspring that birds will fledge, the breeding success of the population is pretty much directly related to the prior fall's acorn crop. So in a really good acorn year, they can even breed in the fall. Survivorship is pretty high among the adults and the young, and then they can produce a lot of young. They can have two nests fairly commonly, really, the next spring. All right. But as I mentioned, even though acorns are really important, they are really one of the reasons why acorn woodpeckers are permanent residents throughout a lot of their range. And I don't know about the Santa Clara Valley and maybe not even here, but acorn woodpeckers are common in Yosemite Valley at 4,000 feet. And it's cold in Yosemite Valley in the winter. There aren't a lot of insects running, out there. But the woodpeckers do quite well, presumably because they have acorns they can go to in the winter. And in the spring, the other thing about the acorns is that when, even here, you could get some pretty crappy days in May, certainly in April, and even in May, 3 or 4 days when it's rainy, cold. There aren't very many insects out there. The really solely insectivorous birds like bluebirds, a lot of them will fail when that happens. Their nests will fail when that happens. But acorn woodpeckers, it takes a lot to cause their nests to fail because they can eat acorns and they can even feed their young acorn bits too when conditions are really bad. But as I say, they are primarily insectivorous. The acorns are really a terrible food resource. I like to think of them as junk food. They're low, their protein is low. What protein they have is mostly bound up in the tannins that make them taste terrible if you ever tried to eat one. They don't tend to have a lot of they can have a lot of fat. So, the caloric content can be pretty good of some of the species. So, really, they're just junk food, but they allow acorn woodpeckers to get by even when conditions are pretty marginal. All right, enough of that. The dependence of acorn woodpeckers on acorns and the granaries that they make, especially the granaries, are unique in the bird world. There's really no other. A lot of birds store food, but I can't think of anything that stores food the way acorn woodpeckers do. But that isn't the reason that we've been studying them for 50 years here at Hastings. That is because the reason for that is because they live in groups. They live in family groups. They're what are known as cooperative breeders. And there are not a lot of cooperative breeders out there. It's worldwide. We're talking about maybe 10% of bird species, but in the US, there are really just a handful. Acorn woodpeckers are really the most striking and the most interesting. Red cockaded woodpeckers in the southeast are another one that you perhaps are aware of. Right around us, there is one other bird that is commonly a cooperative breeder. I'll let you guess what that is in case you don't know it. Another cooperative breeder in the U.S. and this is a really interesting one, is the Florida scrub jay. Okay, now that's really interesting. Of course, it used to be lumped with the western scrub jay here, but Western scrub jays are not, or the California jay is not a cooperative breeder. Cooperative breeding has never been seen in any birds here in California, but and has never been seen on the in the island jay either. But it is common in the Florida jay. Elsewhere, Australia has practically everything and seems to live in groups, including all these fairy wrens that I'm sure you've seen if you've ever gone there. Cooperative breeding is also pretty common in Africa, among, for example, these bee eaters, and even in some of the mammals like these meerkats. But I'm not going to try to explain all these guys. I am just going to make sure that you understand the basics of cooperative breeding in acorn woodpeckers because it's much more complicated than cooperative breeding in almost any of those other species. So here I am back in my youth up there in one of these nests. Okay, these are hole nesting, cavity nesting birds. So we had to climb trees to get to them constantly. And here's the cavity that the hole that they're going in and out of. This is a hole that we actually had to cut in order to be able to reach inside. We then nail the piece of wood back together after we find what's going on inside so that it doesn't disturb the birds. And here I am not too long ago, anyway, going up there. And with luck, this is what we're seeing inside, a whole bunch of those lovely baby woodpeckers. Okay, well, climbing is a whole nother story. Here's a little drone footage of getting to one of the nests that is literally outside my door here. This is a group that Natasha, who is one of the grad students that worked on the birds for several years, now calls Widowmaker because this tree now, this is a valley oak, and there's a classic line about valley oaks. I have never been able to find where it actually comes from. So if any of you know of where the quote actually originated, please let me know. But the story is that they live for 100 years and die for the next 400 years. And that's pretty much true. Here's a tree that's, maybe 400 years old, right here at Hastings. And, these limbs are just sort of slowly falling away. And of course, this one, the hole is right up there somewhere, is going to go any day as well. And as I say, we've been very lucky here that none of them have gone when we happen to be up on them so far, anyway. All right, the goal of getting up there has, of course, been to color band the birds because the entire project is predicated on knowing who individuals are, what their origins are, where they came from, who their parents are, so on and so forth. And the way we do that is by sticking these little color bands on them, and then we can identify them later on without having to catch them again. So the project really involves several aspects that I'll talk about. Getting up to the nests has always been one of the key problems. We have banded some, well, 6,000 acorn woodpeckers now, starting back in 19 with the McRoberts back in 1972. Then we've had over 200 field assistants help us watch the birds, and that involves censusing the birds, see who's still in the groups, and then watching nests to see who's feeding at nests. And then we also have a whole part of the project that's involved in the not genomics really at this point, but a molecular aspect of it, trying to find out who's parenting whom for reasons which is more difficult than you might think, for reasons which may or may not become obvious as I go through their social behavior. If it isn't and you're interested, you can ask me later on. All right. So again, here's a baby with a dark eye, the adult male crown plumage, male and a female up here, and an adult, nice adult male. Um, what I'm going to jump to immediately is the group composition. But there are a couple of things that you want to keep in mind here. I'm going to show you this right here is a relatively large, complicated group. In any particular time, right out there at this very moment, each group is different. There are groups that only consist of a pair, of a single breeder male and a single breeder female. There are pairs of birds out there. Okay, there are some of those birds will have helpers. And these are the non-breeding helpers of both sexes that fledged in the group and remain there for often, several years. Okay, but other groups have multiple co-breeder males, what we call co-breeder males, and some groups even have what we call joint nesting females. We call them joint nesters because they lay their eggs in the same nest cavity in a way, and that's a complication that I'll get into in a minute. Okay, so you have every possible combination of this. There are groups that have one breeder male, two joint nesting females, with and without non-breeding helpers. There are groups that have two co-breeder males, one joint nesting, one female, one, she's not a joint nester because there's only one of them, plus or not non-breeding helpers. There are groups that have two breeder males and two joint nesting females and non-breeding helpers. And there are occasionally even a group like this that has four male co-breeders, two joint nesting females, plus a bunch of non-breeding helpers of both sexes. Okay. Now, if there are male co-breeders, They are usually brothers, though sometimes they're a father and a son. But in any case, they're almost always close relatives. That's the important thing to know. Similarly, if there is more than one breeder female in the group, they are usually sisters or sometimes a mother and a daughter. Okay. You can't actually have three, and we have three joint nesting females, but that's pretty rare. Again, for reasons which I'll get into in a minute. Um, these non-breeding helpers, these are the genetic offspring of the breeders. And as I say, they are of both sexes, both males and females can be helpers, and they can often remain for years as non-breeding helpers in the group. Okay, so kind of try to get that, but try to make sure you recognize the fact that every group out there is different. And at any one point in time, there are groups of all different compositions out there in the population, which makes it pretty difficult to kind of figure out sometimes. But this also makes cooperative breeding in this system really unusual. Most cooperative breeders, for example, well, both red cockaded woodpeckers and Florida scrub jays, they just have helping at the nest. These non-reproductive, some offspring remain in their natal group for a year or two and help their parents raise younger siblings. Okay, we call them helpers because they're feeding at subsequent nests, but they aren't breeders. Okay, they haven't contributed genetically. They're actually helping to raise younger siblings. Okay, but acorn woodpeckers are unusual because of these co-breeders and joint nesters that I mentioned. That's what's called cooperative polygynandry. Two or more males and females sharing breeding status and mates within the same social unit. And that's what's really unusual and rare among cooperative breeders and makes acorn woodpeckers exceedingly special, if I do say so myself. All right, a few other important things I've already mentioned. Co-breeders are close relatives, either siblings, parents, and an offspring, or some combination of that. Mating is always within the group. This is not often the case these days in a lot of birds. A lot of birds, the females are sneaking off and getting copulations somewhere with someone other than their social mate. Okay, but acorn woodpeckers, they already have multiple social mates. And as far as we can tell, it's very rare, if ever, that a bird mates with someone outside their social group. Helpers don't parent offspring. That's why we call them non-parent, non-breeding helpers. And as a result, if you think about it, everyone is closer related to everyone else within the group. Okay, with one exception that I will get to here in a minute. All right, so this is enough to make one feel that, begin to suspect that acorn woodpeckers are one great big happy family. But as I like to say, for those of you who are parts of families or used to be parts of families or would like to be parts of families again someday, within families, there can be a lot of love and so on, but there is also some of the most diabolical competition that you can imagine. And that is also the case among acorn woodpecker societies. I'm going to tell you about two kinds of competition. The first of which is not actually directly related. Oh, I just have to show you this one little video. This is a nest just to show you the kind of intensity that goes on at a nest where there are two breeder females at this. And the males, there's a female here, the male is coming out of the nest, and here's another male showing up. And then here's the second female coming out. Things just get wild at these nests. They're just really kind of interested in what's going on because they're interested in who's parenting whom. Okay, so, uh, all right. Well, I guess I am going to tell you about the one that does have to do with families first. This is egg destruction, what we sort of just like to call egg tossing. Egg tossing is within group reproductive competition between joint nesting females. The issue is, I mentioned that you can have two, rarely even three joint nesting females in a group. I wondered for years how, when that happened, I knew it happened, how they managed to synchronize their egg laying. I mean, how did the females know to both lay their eggs at the same time? And the answer, of course, turns out to be they don't. They don't synchronize it. They don't know when they don't know how to do that. Instead, one of the females invariably kind of lays her egg first. The other female will go in and then take that egg out of the nest and take it to someplace, granary, or this is an anvil in one of their trees. And then it becomes communal property and everybody in the group eats it. It includes the female that tossed it and the female that ate it. It's just basically, and that includes the eggshell because it's a good source of calcium. Now, the really cool thing about this is remember, these females are close relatives. When a female is taking that egg out and destroying it, she is essentially killing a nephew or a niece. But, still, that's basically how they synchronize reproduction because so it's a defensive strategy. If they didn't do that, the female that laid her eggs first would have a big advantage in terms of her eggs becoming the fledglings later on. By destroying those eggs and making them lay synchronously, that means that they basically end up sharing reproduction equally. And I just have to show you one example of this. This comes from this took a lot of effort to get these kinds of data, but this is one of the first cases of egg tossing we ever saw. There are two females. They were a year apart, but we knew they were siblings, 269 and 383. On 16th of April, this is rare, but this is a really interesting case. 383 laid a runt egg. Boy, I don't know if I want to get into the runt egg story, but runt eggs are, well, they're basically abnormal eggs. All birds lay them, but they are really rare in every known bird species except acorn woodpeckers. And acorn woodpeckers often lay them as the first egg especially in joint nesting groups like this one. So 383 laid a runt egg. The other weird thing is that the birds even know that runt eggs are abnormal and are never gonna hatch. And so 383 actually tossed her own egg. Okay, all right. The next day she laid her first normal egg. It just sat there for a day. There we go. Until the day after that, and barely before she could get out of the hole, her sister, 269, went in and destroyed both those eggs. Okay, so now this hole is empty. But a little later on the same morning, 269 went and laid her first egg in a different hole in the territory, which 383 then tossed. Okay, the same thing happened the next day. And finally, on the 20th of April, 383 laid an egg still back here in hole A. 269 tossed it, but then laid a normal egg in that same hole. At that point, 383 is not going to toss it because, as far as she knows, it's still her egg. And 269, of course, it was her egg. So that was the end of egg destruction. 269 laid another egg the next day. Both females laid eggs the next 3 days. In the end, 15 eggs were laid by these two females. Half of them were destroyed, half of them were incubated. And this is not an unusual story for this kind of situation. The only unusual thing here was that we were able to document the fact that they did this in two different cavities. So this at some level explains, at least at approximate level, why acorn woodpeckers are joint nesters, why they're true communal nesters. It's because even when females try to lay eggs separately in different cavities, they don't let them. They won't let them do that. They'll keep destroying eggs until one of them gives up and goes ahead and lays her egg in the same cavity as the other female. And so you end up with joint nesting rather than separate nests of these two females, which does occur in other species of cooperative breeders. All right, so here we have a baby again. I want to talk a bit about reproductive vacancies. So I've mentioned that acorn woodpecker groups, almost everyone is related to everybody else. And so this raises a really interesting problem, which was a big deal back when I started, which was how do groups persist through time? What determines reproductive roles within groups? Okay, and there are two possibilities. One is reproductive competition, and the focus of it are same-sex breeders. Okay, the reason why a helper male is a helper and not a breeder is because there are older dominant males, mainly his father, in the group, and he keeps them from breeding. He suppresses reproduction of his male offspring. This is real common among mammalian societies. An alternative is incest avoidance, which the focus of which are opposite sex breeders. Okay, the reason that helper male is a helper male has nothing to do with the fact that there's an older male, as a fact with the fact that the breeder females are his mother. And so if he did breed, he'd be breeding incestuously with his mother or sister. Okay, so we can test this in acorn woodpeckers by looking at what happens when you have a reproductive vacancy. Here we have a group, one breeder male, one breeder female, one helper male, and one helper female. Let's assume that female dies, the breeder female dies. Now you have a female vacancy. And the big question is, well, what happens? Does the helper male become, the obvious thing if it's reproductive competition is that the helper female should now become the breeder because there's nobody there to keep her from breeding. Okay, whereas if it's incest avoidance, of course, then it's the helper male who gets to become a breeder because assuming that the helper female doesn't start breeding. And in fact, that's what happens. The answer of this is that incest avoidance wins the day. Birds inherit their natal territory, but only if their parent of the opposite sex dies and then is replaced by a new female from outside the group. This new female is presumably unrelated. The son then becomes a co-breeder, inherits and can breed with his father, whereas the helper female basically ends up disappearing or getting kicked out of the group by the new female. We don't really know which. All right. The other interesting thing about reproductive vacancies is that they aren't filled quietly. They happen following what we call power struggles. Power struggles are fights over the right to fill reproductive vacancies. What happens is that helpers from other groups come to the group and then fight in sibling coalitions to be able to see who's going to get to fill that vacancy and become breeders in the new group. These things are great. They can involve dozens of birds and last for days. And they're really good evidence that competition for breeding opportunities is intense in these populations. And I have another little video here, if it'll run. Come on. Yeah, man. Well, they've been working so well. I don't know why this one won't work. Uh,
Other females
here we go.
for status. Birds clash in aerial battles for this much coveted prize. The clan wars begin.
I like that last one. Those are two birds that are grappling with their legs, and it's the only time in the 45 years I've been studying these things, I've been looking at these things, that I actually managed to catch a bird by hand. Because on occasion they'll do that. They'll actually fall to the ground, and it takes them a few seconds to get their bearings again. And if you happen to be in the right place, you can actually run over and grab them. Okay, so you have these power struggles. As I say, there's some of the best evidence that one of the major things that's driving group living in these birds is the fact that it's difficult to become a breeder. It's difficult to find a good territory in these populations. And that raises the whole question of, why do these birds stay? I mean, this is not that common. Most birds, the young disperse fairly soon after fledgling and go off on their own, find a territory of their own. Well, there are some reasons why they might have what we call direct fitness benefits. Uh, one of which is the fact that I mentioned that they may get an opportunity to inherit the natal territory at some point. But beyond that, staying in their natal territory can be a very safe place. I mean, their parents are there. They have a granary and so forth. They can have a good probability of doing very well. But we believe that the main reason is what we call ecological constraints. The main constraint being that, excuse me, that granary, but also the cavities that they're actually nesting and turn out to be very important as well. There's one final thing I want to sort of mention about this is that there are kind of two ways this can go. One of which is if conditions are highly variable and unpredictable. And I like to call this the hard life hypothesis. And the idea being that conditions are so bad that two birds are not able to raise young on their own. They have to have additional help to be able to do it. The alternative is what I like to call the habitat saturation hypothesis. Conditions are stable and predictable and nice. And what this ends up doing is that it fills up the habitat with birds. And because of that, again, there's kind of nowhere to go because all the territories are occupied. Now, given that I love the Upper Carmel Valley and love Oak Savannah and think this place is like the most fabulous place to live in the world, you can kind of guess which one I have always sort of favored. But the fact is that there is a way you can kind of test this. And that is that under the hard life hypothesis, helpers are supposed to have a strong effect when conditions are poor. That's when they're really needed. Whereas, if conditions are really good, then the helper effect, it shouldn't be, there's no reason why you expect it to do well when conditions are bad. And the fact is that the acorn crop, as I've already mentioned, does vary a lot from year to year. This is the Valley Oak acorn crop every year here at Hastings. You have years when there are hardly any acorns, like 2003, and years when the trees are loaded. And I've already mentioned how the birds do very well. When there are lots of acorns, they do very poorly when there are not acorns out there. So the question here is, when conditions are bad, are helpers much more important? And oddly enough, the answer is no. If you look at helper males here, this is basically the effect of helpers as a function of the size of the acorn crop. Helper males are really important when the acorn crop is good. When the acorn crop is bad, they're actually a net negative because, after all, they got to eat acorns, they got to eat food too, and the group has to support them. And so when they're there and there isn't much food, there's even less food for young. So, in fact, the results are exactly the opposite of what is predicted by the hard life hypothesis. Helpers appear to be most valuable when conditions are good, supporting the habitat saturation hypothesis. even though conditions vary a lot. And the limiting resource, as I mentioned, really does appear to be, unsurprisingly, these granaries. When there's a granary out there, there's usually a group of birds defending it. If there isn't a granary, then, it's not much of a territory. It also turns out, and we've experimentally done what we can to try to test this, that these cavities are also very important, which is pretty bizarre given that these are, after all, woodpeckers are supposed to be able to drill cavities at will. But yeah, acorn woodpeckers are not very good at drilling cavities, oddly enough. Maybe it's because they spend all their time drilling holes for acorns. I don't know. Okay. And the only other thing I wanted to mention is that this is a long-term study. This has been going on since 1972. So, right, it's 50. This is basically the 54th year of the study. And you learn a lot doing a long-term study. And one of the things you learn is how many problems there are with long-term studies. Uh, the idea with a long-term study is often you kind of want conditions. You want to see how things change as conditions change, but you want everything, you want to control as much as you can. And the problem is that nothing is controlled out there in the world. Uh, when, our own biases change, I'm a lot older than I was, and the habitat is a lot different. And I show that here. This is the house we lived in when I was the research zoologist here for almost 30 years. It was built, this is shown right after it was built in 1930. Okay, it's the schoolhouse because it's right next to School Hill. It's a great place to live. I loved it. And you can see these oaks right here in this field that was across the hill from it. This is what this looks like today. You can't even see the house anymore because these trees have grown up so much that, it's just the habitat is a lot different than it was back here. And the really scary thing about this is that I basically was here for half this time. But if you'd ever asked me how things had changed during the time I'd been here, I probably would have said something like, "Oh, well, it's a little more, grown up than it was back, when I started." But you're here year after year, and things change very relatively slowly, and you just don't notice the fact that a tree like that is now a mature tree that can harbor a whole group of acorn woodpeckers on its own. So, and I think this is actually pretty common in a lot of California because this is taken right sort of at the end of the ranching era, as I like to call it, when I think a lot of California was pretty well cut over by the ranchers, by the homesteaders back in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And here, all these trees have now grown back, which of course is one of the reasons why fires are so much more of a problem now than it than they may have been, 60 or 70 years ago. It's because there wasn't as much vegetation back then. But that, of course, is getting into a whole different subject. And it's 8 o'clock probably, so I'm going to quit. And here we go. If anyone has questions, that's fine.